Tunic is a delightful love letter to games both past and present. While it appears to be a simple isometric adventure game on the surface, there's an incredible amount of depth to be experienced. It's certainly not a perfect game. There are definitely flaws and annoyances in spots, but Tunic does so much, so masterfully, that I quickly fell in love with it. In this immaculately detailed adventure, the pros greatly outshine the cons, with beautiful surprises that make it a true joy to experience. This review will be interesting in that I'll tiptoe around certain mechanics, as well as pretty much all of the story. Without saying too much, a huge aspect of the genius of Tunic surrounds the ideas of preconception, knowledge, and the lack thereof. In other words, what you don't know is just as fundamental to the experience as what you do. Please pardon my vague descriptions in places, but it's because I feel like saying too much might rob the player of certain moments that are best experienced going in blind. You begin your adventure waking up on the edges of the shore, with no memory or sense of direction besides a singular path across a narrow bridge. At the base of nearby stairs rests an open doorway, and if you've ever owned an NES, an immediate warm sense of nostalgia and intuition begins to tickle at the back of your neck. A quote comes to mind as you enter: "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." On the surface, it's hard not to see the strong influence of The Legend of Zelda. There are countless nods to the franchise, beautifully sprinkled throughout and just waiting to be discovered and charm the player. What might not be expected though are some inspirations from another popular franchise of the present, Dark Souls. Your health doesn't automatically recover, and potions, much like flasks, are limited and only refill upon visiting monuments to a mysterious being known as the Heir. And like any Soulsborne-esque game, you quickly learn in early combat situations that dodging is vital to staying alive. There's definitely a bit of an early difficulty spike to get that message across to the player, as you are without shield until that becomes clear. What I'd speculate to be the third major influence took me by surprise, but I'll keep it a secret. I might make a secondary video discussing spoilers, but if you've played Tunic and have guesses as to what it might be, I'd love to hear them in the comments section below. To give a bit of a hint though, be sure to have a pen and paper nearby, as you'll be taking a lot of notes. All of these various influences harmonize surprisingly well together, creating a cohesive and jolly experience with a surprising amount of depth, one that rewards exploration, curiosity, and intellect. But while there are certainly challenging aspects to Tunic, the game is flexible enough to let the player tailor their experience to their own liking. The pen and paper stuff I just mentioned, that can be disregarded almost entirely if you'd rather focus primarily on the action and adventure. Think of it as an optional red pill of sorts if you just want to see how deep the foxhole goes. Also baked into the experience are settings for infinite stamina and health. There's a note in the gamer's manual that says, "Options mean you can keep playing if the challenge is too much right now. You are allowed." Another note reads, "Stumped? Here are some clues for you. Try to help your friends if you can." With so much unfortunate gatekeeping taking place in gaming nowadays, it's a pleasant surprise and breath of fresh air for a game to explicitly tell players that any and all choices are valid, encouraging collaboration, and I sincerely applaud the developers for doing that. Tunic is simply breathtaking. The world is colorful and very carefully designed with precision. Every environment is visually distinct, and even the smallest areas have been given a lot of care. The original soundtrack by Lifeformed and Janice Kwan is nothing short of perfection. I don't know how best to describe it in a way that does it justice, but there's a complexity and depth that you can feel deep within yourself as it grabs you emotionally. Like the game itself and its inspirations, there are a lot of familiar sounds that are reminiscent of both the past and present. One of my favorite songs, for example, called Nocturnals, just transports me back to Donkey Kong Country, specifically Coral Capers. This might be my favorite video game soundtrack in years. It's clear that a lot of love and care went into the composition and performance. As much as I praise this game though, it does have its moments of frustration. For example, While the isometric camera lends to a plethora of secrets being hidden, some in plain sight, there are moments when you have to navigate behind walls or structures, and it's a bit of a mess as you get caught or stuck colliding against objects you just can't see. The game tries to help by having a silhouette of the player in the foreground as a reference, but sometimes it's just not enough. There was one time I accidentally got stuck in a corner, and because a column was in front of my character, my attempts at escaping resulted in button mashing for what felt like minutes as I had no real reference for the object collision. My other major frustration relates to combat, specifically the lock-on mechanic. Because certain objects in the environment can be targeted, such as explosive pots, it can become awkward when your intention is to lock onto the enemy running at you, and the game instead fixes on an unrelated item because it happens to be closer. Swapping between targets with your right joystick can also feel a little random, so in tense moments where you're surrounded, it's not the best feeling when you take hits because you're facing an unintended direction in a mad scramble. But this isn't really a huge deal, as it's only problematic in sparse specific spots. There's one enemy type that splits in half several times as you defeat each form. If you're unfortunate enough to face 3 or 4 of them at once, then the problem is really highlighted. The real issue though with the lock-on mechanic is that you move really slowly when it's in use, and as a result I found attacks frustrating to dodge at times, especially during boss fights. There's one attack in particular that is reminiscent to when Bowser will jump stop the ground in a Mario game and rings appear that you need to jump over. If you're locking on at that moment, your dodge rolls are so short and movement so slow that you basically get hit unless you're lucky. And it's easy to think, well, just don't lock on, but it's often the best way to keep track of enemies that are wildly dashing around the screen quickly. Another really unfortunate issue, and probably the biggest one for me personally, is how items are equipped and used. Instead of hitting start or select, the left bumper pulls up the inventory menu. Once in that menu, hitting a face button will assign the highlighted item to that button. Because the game doesn't pause, and because there are only 3 item slots, 2 really frustrating things can happen. Either you accidentally hit the left bumper in a fight, and in a panic to try to swing your sword, you accidentally start remapping items, or you desperately need to swap in an item during a fight due to only having 3 item slots, but you can't because being immobile for a few seconds can often lead to death. On top of that, on the HUD the 3 face buttons are placed in a horizontal line, but those buttons on the controller are vertically adjacent in a half diamond formation. So if I had a nickel for every time I accidentally use the wrong item for this reason, the game might have paid for itself. And then there are the moments when you accidentally hit B in the menu because it's kind of a universal instinct to back out in gaming, only to realize the mistake you've just made. It's just not super intuitive to hit a bumper to access and leave a menu, and it's definitely something I wish the developers would have spent more time thinking about. That being said though, it's hard not to love this game in spite of these issues. Earlier I said I was going to tiptoe around some big stuff in the game. There are some incredibly novel ideas that are beautifully executed. Much like everything else, the puzzles in Tunic are very elaborately thought out. I kid you not, but I might have spent as much time outside of the game with pen and paper, looking at notes, examining maps, etc., than in the game itself. As mentioned earlier, this stuff is optional, but the red pill analogy I feel is really accurate. You can complete the game in roughly 10 hours, but it easily took me twice as long to turn over every rock and complete every challenge. And Tunic rewards the curious both in-game, but also just makes the player feel amazing with these small eureka moment adrenaline rushes. While this is the first review on this channel, you might realize soon enough, if you haven't already, that I'm really cautious when it comes to anything that could spoil the experience. That's not just limited to surface details, but design choices I feel are fundamental to the experience. Kinda like with illusions, something's magical until the trick is explained. And especially with a game that I love as much as Tunic, I'm trying to walk the tightrope between giving people enough of a reason to play it and not explaining the tricks that could kill its surprises. And that's what Tunic is to me. Pure magic. It's by no means perfect, but I am so happy for having played it. My time with it was extremely meaningful, as I haven't experienced anything quite like it before. This game, for me personally, is a 9.5 out of 10. Thank you for watching. I haven't done a proper game review in nearly a decade, and it's something I've been meaning to start up again for a very long time. I know the first few will be a little rough around the edges, but it's just nice to try again. If you'd like to stick around for the ride, I'd appreciate any support in the form of a like, subscription, or even just a comment. Let me know if you've played Tunic, and what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them.